Officer David Miller was tired after a long day. The small town of Oakidge was usually quiet, but today had been busy with paperwork and small problems to solve. As the evening sun began to set, David drove his police car slowly down Main Street, hoping for a peaceful end to his shift. He had been an officer for 12 years now. At 38, his dark hair showed a few gray streaks, and small wrinkles had formed around his kind brown eyes. People in town respected him for being fair and helpful. David knew most folks by name, which made his job easier in this community of just 15,000 people. Only 30 more minutes, he thought to himself, looking at the clock on his dashboard. The radio was quiet, and the street was almost empty as most people were home for dinner. Then, David noticed a blue sedan ahead. The car moved a little too fast and swerved slightly between lanes. His police instincts told him to check it out. He turned on his lights and signaled for the car to pull over. The blue sedan slowed down and stopped properly by the curb. David called in the license plate number to dispatch before stepping out of his police car. This was routine for him. He had stopped hundreds of cars over the years. As David walked toward the car, he noticed it was an older model but well kept. The driver rolled down the window as he approached. He expected to see a teenager, or maybe someone who had a few drinks, but instead, a woman in her early 30s looked up at him. "Good evening, ma'am. License and registration, please," David said in his professional voice. The woman seemed nervous, but not in a suspicious way. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her purse on the passenger seat. "I'm sorry, officer. Was I speeding?" "I'm new to town and still learning the roads," she said softly. "You were going a bit fast and crossing lanes a little. Just wanted to make sure everything is okay," David explained. The woman nodded and handed him her license. "I was trying to find my new apartment building. I guess I got distracted looking at street signs." David took the license and glanced at it. The name read Emma Roberts. When she reached over to open her glove compartment for the registration, her sleeve pulled up slightly. That's when David saw it, a tattoo on her inner wrist. It wasn't the tattoo itself that caught his attention. Many people had tattoos these days. It was the specific design that made his heart skip a beat. The tattoo showed a unique pattern, a shield with a small flame inside it. David knew this symbol very well. In fact, he had seen it only once before in his life, 15 years ago, during an event that had changed him forever. His professional demeanor slipped for a moment. He stared at the tattoo, then at the woman's face, trying to place her in his memory. Emma noticed his stare and pulled her sleeve down quickly, looking uncomfortable. "Is everything okay, officer?" David cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. Yes, everything's fine. That tattoo on your wrist." Emma looked surprised. "Oh, this? It's something personal from a long time ago." David nodded slowly, his mind racing with memories from the past. This routine traffic stop had suddenly become something much more significant. As he stood there on the quiet street, David realized this encounter was about to uncover a story he had tried to forget for 15 years. Officer Miller took a deep breath to steady himself. The shield with a flame tattoo brought back memories he had locked away for years. "Ms. Roberts, do you mind if I ask about that tattoo?" David's voice was softer now, less official. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Most people don't notice it," she said. "It's from a difficult time in my life." David nodded slowly. "I think I may know something about that time." He handed back her license. "Would you mind stepping out of the car for a moment? You're not in trouble." Emma hesitated, then turned off the engine and stepped out. She was average height with shoulder-length brown hair. Her eyes showed caution but not fear. "That symbol, the shield with the flame, it's connected to the Oakidge fire of 2009, isn't it?" David asked quietly. Emma's eyes widened. "How did you know that?" David gestured to a small bench on the sidewalk nearby. "Let's sit down for a minute." As they walked to the bench, David's mind raced back 15 years. He had been a rookie officer then, just 6 months on the job when the worst fire in Oakidge history broke out at the Pineview Apartments. 12 people died that night, and many more were injured. It was the kind of tragedy that marked a town forever. They sat down, and David noticed Emma rubbing her tattoo through her sleeve. A nervous habit, perhaps. "I was there that night," David said. "One of the first responders at Pineview." Emma stared at him, recognition slowly dawning on her face. You were the officer who... She stopped mid-sentence, studying his features more carefully. There were many officers there, David said modestly. But I remember a young girl, about 15 or 16, who had that exact symbol drawn on a notebook. She was in apartment 4C. Emma's eyes filled with tears. That was me. I was 16. My little brother drew that symbol. He was obsessed with superheroes and made up his own, a shield with a flame for protection and courage. Her voice trembled. He was 10 years old. David remembered now. The teenage girl had been found in the hallway, unconscious from smoke inhalation. She had been trying to reach her brother's room when the smoke overcame her. By the time firefighters reached apartment 4C, it was too late for the boy. I didn't recognize you at first, David said gently. You've changed. So have you, Emma replied. But your eyes are the same. David remembered sitting with Emma at the hospital afterward. He had stayed long after his shift ended, waiting until her aunt and uncle arrived from out of town. The girl had no one else. Her parents had divorced years earlier, and her mother, who had custody, was out of town that night. Emma and her brother had been home alone. You told me about his superhero drawings, David said softly, about how he wanted to be a firefighter someday. Emma nodded, wiping away tears. I got this tattoo on my 18th birthday. To keep him with me always. The radio on David's shoulder crackled, bringing them both back to the present. He reached up to adjust the volume. I never got to thank you properly, Emma said. You stayed with me that whole night. You even brought me that horrible hospital coffee and my sketchbook from the apartment. David remembered going back to the damaged building with a firefighter, specifically to retrieve the girl's sketchbook, the one thing she had asked for, the book with her brother's drawings. Why are you back in Oakidge? David asked. After everything that happened here? Emma looked down at her tattoo. That's actually a long story, she said. One I never expected to tell to the officer who saved my life 15 years ago. The sun had nearly set now, casting long shadows across the quiet street. David's shift was officially over, but he knew this conversation was just beginning. The evening air grew cooler as David and Emma sat on the bench. A streetlight flickered on above them, casting a soft glow. I never thought I'd come back here, Emma admitted. For years, I couldn't even hear the name Oakidge without feeling sick. David nodded. He had seen this before in people who had experienced trauma, how places could become triggers for painful memories. After the fire, my aunt and uncle took me to live with them in Colorado, Emma continued. I finished high school there, went to college, tried to build a new life. But Oakidge was always there in the back of my mind. A car drove past slowly, its headlights briefly illuminating their faces. David noticed how Emma's expression had changed. She seemed both vulnerable and determined. So what brought you back after all this time? David asked. Emma took a deep breath. About 6 months ago, I found a box of my brother's things in my aunt's attic. Stuff that had been saved from the apartment, but that I was too upset to look at back then. David remembered how the firefighters had carefully collected items from the apartments, photos, important papers, anything that could be salvaged for the survivors. Inside the box was his journal, Emma said. He kept a journal where he wrote stories about his superhero character, the one with the shield and flame symbol. She smiled slightly at the memory. Michael was always writing and drawing. He wasn't very good at sports or making friends, but he had this amazing imagination. David leaned forward slightly. What was in the journal? Stories. Lots of stories about his hero saving Oakidge from different dangers. But there was also a letter. Emma's voice grew quieter. A letter he wrote to me that I never got to read. It was tucked in the back of the journal. David waited patiently as Emma gathered herself. He noticed she was wearing a simple silver chain around her neck, her fingers absently touching it as she spoke. In the letter, Michael wrote that his biggest dream was to create real comic books someday. He wanted to make his hero famous so that kids everywhere would know about the shield and flame. Emma smiled through her tears. He wrote that I was the person who always believed in him, and that we would do it together when we grew up. He would write the stories, and I would draw the pictures since I was the artist in the family. David remembered now that the teenage Emma had been clutching a sketchbook when she was rescued. Not just any notebook, but her art. After reading that letter, I realized I never dealt with what happened properly, Emma continued. I ran away from Oakidge, tried to forget, focused on building a practical life. I became an accountant, about as far from an artist as you can get. She held up her wrist, showing the tattoo clearly for the first time. The shield was simple but elegant, with a small flame in the center, exactly as David remembered from the boy's drawings. I decided it was time to honor that promise to Michael. I quit my job, packed up my life, and moved back to Oakidge to start over. I'm opening a small shop downtown next month, a combination bookstore and art studio for kids. It'll have comic books, art supplies, and free classes for kids who want to draw or write their own stories. David felt a lump in his throat. You're going to call it the Shield and Flame, aren't you? Emma looked surprised. How did you know? Just a guess, David said with a small smile. It's what your brother would have wanted. Emma nodded. The grand opening is on May 17th. That would have been his 25th birthday. David's radio crackled again, and this time a voice came through asking for his status. I should probably let you get back to work, Emma said, standing up from the bench. David stood too, knowing there was more to this story, much more, but also knowing that his duty called. About that taillight, he said, his official tone returning slightly. You should get that fixed soon. I will, Emma promised. And the bookstore, David added. I'd like to hear more about it sometime. The next morning, David couldn't stop thinking about his encounter with Emma. After his shift ended, he drove downtown to the area where most of the small businesses were located. He parked his personal car, a blue pickup truck, and walked slowly down Main Street. It wasn't hard to find the place. A storefront that had been empty for months now had paper covering the windows. A small sign on the door read, "Coming soon. The Shield and Flame Books and Art Studio." David stood outside for a moment, looking at the sign. Through a gap in the paper, he could see movement inside. After a moment's hesitation, he knocked on the door. The movement inside stopped, and then footsteps approached. Emma opened the door, looking surprised to see him. Officer Miller, she said. David, he corrected her. I'm off duty now. Emma smiled and pushed the door open wider. Want to come in? It's a mess, but I can use a break anyway. David stepped inside. The space was indeed a mess, but in the productive way of a work in progress. Shelves were being installed along the walls, and a counter area was partially built. Paint cans and tools were scattered around, and the smell of fresh paint filled the air. You're doing all this yourself? David asked, impressed. Most of it, Emma said. I hired someone for the electrical work, but the rest is me. My dad was a carpenter, and I picked up a lot from him before. She trailed off. Well, before he left. David remembered from the fire investigation that Emma's father had moved across the country years before the tragedy. He's not in the picture anymore? David asked carefully. Emma shook her head. He called after the fire, sent money for a while, but we never really reconnected. She gave a small shrug. It's okay. People cope with loss in different ways. David nodded, understanding all too well from his years as an officer. He had seen how tragedy could either bring families together or tear them apart. So this is it, Emma said, changing the subject and gesturing around the space. The front will be the bookstore with a focus on graphic novels and comics. The back room will be the art studio where I'll host classes. She pointed to a door at the rear of the main room. May I? David asked, pointing to the back room. Of course. David walked through the doorway into a larger space with big windows that let in plenty of natural light. Tables were arranged in the center, and along one wall was a large mural in progress. The mural showed a city skyline that was clearly Oakidge, with its distinctive clock tower and the mountains behind it. Above the city, partially sketched in, was a figure with a shield and flame symbol. This is amazing, David said, genuinely impressed. Emma stood next to him, looking at her work. I want the kids to feel inspired when they come here, like they're in a place where heroes are made. Your brother would have loved this, David said quietly. Emma nodded, her eyes filling with tears that she quickly blinked away. There's something I didn't tell you yesterday, she said after a moment, about why I was so nervous when you pulled me over. David turned to look at her, curious. After I found Michael's journal, I also found something else, Emma continued. A newspaper article about the fire with a picture of the first responders. She walked to a box in the corner and pulled out a framed newspaper clipping. The photo showed firefighters and police officers outside the burned apartment building. A younger David was visible in the background, helping a paramedic with a stretcher. I recognized you as soon as you approached my car yesterday, Emma admitted. I've been carrying this with me since I decided to move back. I wanted to find you, to thank you properly, but I didn't know how. Then suddenly you were there, pulling me over, and I panicked. David studied the old photo, memories flooding back. Why didn't you say something right away? Emma laughed softly. Would you have believed me? Officer, before you write me a ticket, I've been looking for you for months to thank you for something that happened 15 years ago. It sounds crazy. David smiled. I've heard crazier things on traffic stops, believe me. Besides, Emma added, I wanted to have the shop ready first. I was planning to invite you to the opening. She hesitated, then pulled an envelope from her pocket. This is for you. I was going to mail it to the police station next week. David took the envelope and opened it. Inside was an invitation to the grand opening of the Shield and Flame, along with a handwritten note that simply said, To the officer who saved more than just my life that night. Thank you. David stared at the invitation in his hands. The paper was thick and high quality, with the Shield and Flame logo printed at the top in rich colors. He felt a strange mixture of emotions, pride, sadness, and something else he couldn't quite name. Would you like some coffee? Emma asked, breaking the silence. I have a small kitchen set up in the back. David nodded. Coffee would be great. He followed Emma through another door into a tiny room with a mini fridge, microwave, and coffee maker. She filled 2 mugs and handed one to him. The mug had the Shield and Flame logo painted on it. I'm practicing my designs, she explained when she noticed him looking at it. I want everything in the shop to feel connected to Michael's vision. They carried their coffees back into the main shop area, where Emma cleared some paint cans from 2 folding chairs so they could sit. There's something I've been wondering about, David said after taking a sip of his coffee. How did you survive that night? The fire was so intense, and by the time we got there? Emma nodded, understanding his unspoken question. The fire had moved quickly through the building, and many hadn't made it out. I was in my room studying when I smelled smoke, she began. I ran to Michael's room, but there was already fire in the hallway. I remember screaming his name, trying to get through, but the smoke was so thick. She paused, her fingers unconsciously touching her tattoo. After that, I don't remember much until waking up in the hospital. David remembered finding her in the hallway, unconscious but still breathing. He had carried her down 3 flights of stairs while firefighters battled the blaze. What I never told you, David said slowly, was that we went back for your brother. 2 firefighters broke through to his room from the outside. They found him under his bed. Emma's eyes widened. I didn't know that. He had wrapped himself in a wet towel, just like they teach kids in fire safety classes. It wasn't enough in that heat, but it showed how smart he was. He did everything right. A tear slid down Emma's cheek. Thank you for telling me that. All these years, I felt guilty for not reaching him. You tried, David said firmly. You were just a kid yourself. Emma wiped her eyes. After the fire, when I was in the hospital, you brought me something. My sketchbook. How did you get it? David smiled at the memory. I went back to the apartment with the fire marshal when they were investigating the cause. I remembered you talking about your drawings before you passed out. The sketchbook was on your desk, slightly damaged but still intact. I thought you might want it. That sketchbook is what got me through the next few years, Emma said. Drawing was the only thing that helped with the nightmares. She stood up and walked to a cardboard box in the corner. From it, she pulled out an old, water-damaged sketchbook with burned edges. She handed it to David. You kept it all these years, he said, surprised. It's my most valuable possession, Emma replied. Look inside. David carefully opened the sketchbook. The first few pages contained teenage drawings, typical sketches of friends and school scenes. But as he turned the pages, he saw that the later drawings were all variations of the shield and flame symbol, becoming more refined and detailed with each page. The last drawing in the book stopped him cold. It was a portrait of a young police officer, carefully rendered in pencil. It was him, 15 years younger, in his uniform. I drew that from memory in the hospital, Emma explained. I wanted to remember the officer who saved me. David looked up from the sketch, deeply moved. I was just doing my job. Emma shook her head. No, you went beyond your job. You treated me like a person, not just a victim. You talked to me about my art, about Michael. You made me feel like I still had value when I'd lost everything. David handed the sketchbook back to her. And now you're using that talent to honor your brother. I think that's incredible. Emma smiled through her tears. There's something else I need to show you. Something I found in Michael's journal that I think you should see. She walked to her desk and picked up a small, partially burned notebook with a familiar shield and flame drawn on the cover. Emma carefully opened the burned notebook. The edges of the pages were black and crisp, but most of the writing inside was still readable. She handled it gently, like a precious artifact. This is Michael's journal, she said, his hero journal, as he called it. David leaned closer as Emma turned the pages. The notebook was filled with childish handwriting and colorful drawings of a superhero character. The hero wore a blue costume with the shield and flame symbol on the chest. He called his superhero Defender, Emma explained. Not very original, but Michael was only 10. David smiled. I think it's a great name. Emma stopped at a page near the middle of the journal. This is what I wanted to show you. The page contained a drawing of the superhero standing with another character, a police officer in a blue uniform. The two figures were side by side, both with their arms crossed in superhero poses. That's Officer Friendly, Emma said. Michael's second character. He started drawing him after a police officer visited his school for a safety program. David stared at the drawing. The officer character had dark hair and a friendly smile, not exactly David's likeness, but close enough to feel strange. Michael was so impressed by that police visit, Emma continued. He talked about it for weeks, how officers were real-life heroes without superpowers. She turned to another page that showed the superhero and officer character working together to save people from a burning building. These are dated just 2 weeks before the fire, Emma said quietly. David felt a chill run through him. It was like looking at a child's premonition of his own tragedy. There's more, Emma said, turning to the last pages of the journal. This is what I found after I moved back to Oakidge. The final pages contained a story written in Michael's childish handwriting. It described how Defender and Officer Friendly saved a girl from danger and became a team forever after. I never read this part until recently, Emma explained. It was too painful to look at his journal after the fire, but when I finally did, she pointed to the date on the page. May 5, 2009, just 1 week before the apartment fire. It's like he knew, she whispered. Not about the fire, but about being saved, about you. David felt overwhelmed. He had responded to thousands of calls during his career, helped countless people, but few had affected him like the Pine View fire. He had often wondered what had happened to the teenage girl he carried from the building, but had never tried to find out. After reading this, Emma continued, I realized something important. Michael may be gone, but his superhero lives on, not just through my shop or this tattoo, but through people like you. Real heroes who save people every day. David shook his head modestly. I'm just doing my job. That's what all heroes say, Emma replied with a small smile. Look at this last page. She turned to the final entry in the journal. At the bottom of the page, in large letters surrounded by stars, Michael had written, Remember, a hero's job is never done. That's why I came back to Oakidge, Emma said. Not just to open a shop, but to start a program for kids affected by trauma. Art therapy, writing workshops, a safe place where they can process their feelings like I never really did. She closed the journal carefully. And I want you to be part of it, if you're willing. To speak to the kids about safety, but also about courage and hope. To be officer friendly in real life. David was silent for a moment, taking it all in. His radio had crackled 15 years ago with an emergency call, and he had responded without thinking twice. Now, sitting in this half-finished shop with Emma and her brother's journal, he realized that call had never really ended. I'd be honored, he said finally, but on one condition. Emma raised her eyebrows questioningly. You have to let me help you finish setting up this place before the grand opening, David said. I'm pretty handy with tools. Emma smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Deal, she said, extending her hand. As they shook hands, David noticed the shield and flame tattoo on her wrist again. What had initially stunned him now felt like a sign, a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions can have the most profound impact. Over the next 2 weeks, David spent most of his free time at the Shield and Flame. After his shifts ended, he would change out of his uniform and head downtown to help Emma prepare for the grand opening. Together, they painted walls, built shelves, and arranged furniture. Word spread quickly in the small town. People became curious about the new shop and the woman who had returned to Oakidge after so many years. "The mayor called me today," Emma told David one evening as they installed a display case. "He wants to come to the opening ceremony." David looked up from his work. "That's great. Mayor Phillips is good people. He was on the city council when the fire happened, you know." Emma nodded. "He mentioned that. He also said the local newspaper wants to do a story about the shop and about Michael." David could see the mix of emotions on her face. Publicity would be good for the business, but talking about Michael to strangers wouldn't be easy. "You don't have to do it if you're not ready," David said gently. Emma took a deep breath. "No, I want to. Michael's story should be told. That's the whole point of this place." She gestured around at the nearly finished shop. "But I was hoping you might be there for the interview. You're part of the story too." David was touched by her request. "Of course. Just let me know when." As the opening day grew closer, Emma received a surprising phone call. She was arranging books on a shelf when her cell phone rang. David, who was building a reading nook in the corner, watched as her expression changed from confusion to shock. "Who was that?" he asked after she hung up. Emma sat down on a nearby stool. "My father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's coming to the opening." David put down his tools and moved closer. "Are you okay with that?" Emma looked uncertain. "I don't know. We haven't seen each other in person since I was 14. He said he read about the shop online. Someone shared the newspaper's preview article on social media." "How do you feel about seeing him?" David asked carefully. Emma twisted the bracelet on her wrist, a nervous habit David had noticed over the past 2 weeks. Nervous, angry, curious. She looked up at David. He was supposed to take Michael that weekend for his monthly visit, but he canceled at the last minute because of work. David understood immediately what she was saying. If her father had taken Michael as planned, the boy wouldn't have been in the apartment during the fire. "He carries that guilt," Emma continued. "I know he does. It's why he couldn't face me afterward. But now he wants to come and see the shop." David sat down beside her. "People make mistakes, Emma. Even terrible ones they can never fix." Emma nodded slowly. "That's what Michael would say. He never stopped loving Dad, even after all the cancelled visits and broken promises." She managed a small smile. "He used to say everyone deserves a second chance, even the bad guys in his comics." "Wise kid," David commented. "Yeah, he was." Emma stood up, her resolve returning. "I'll tell Dad he's welcome to come, for Michael's sake." The day before the grand opening, they worked late into the evening. The shop was transformed. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with comics, graphic novels, and art books. The center of the store had tables with art supplies and comfortable chairs for reading. The mural in the back room was finished, the superhero defender flying above the Oakidge skyline, with Officer Friendly standing guard below. As they stood admiring their work, Emma turned to David. "I couldn't have done this without you." David shook his head. "Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you think." Emma touched her tattoo thoughtfully. "Tomorrow, this place becomes real. Michael's dream becomes real." "Are you ready?" David asked. Emma looked around the shop one more time, at the shield and flame symbols that appeared throughout the space, at the children's drawing table in the corner, at the mural that brought her brother's hero to life. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm finally ready." As they locked up for the night, neither of them noticed the older man parked across the street, watching the shop with tears in his eyes. A man with the same jawline as Emma and the same creative spirit as the boy who had once dreamed of superheroes. The morning of the grand opening arrived with perfect weather. Sunshine bathed Oakidge in a warm glow as Emma stood outside the shield and flame, keys in hand. She had arrived early to prepare, but was surprised to find David already waiting. "Couldn't sleep," he explained with a smile, holding up a coffee tray and a box of donuts. "Thought you might need breakfast." Inside, Emma checked everything one last time. The books were perfectly arranged. The art supplies were organized by color. A large cake decorated with the shield and flame symbol sat on a table near the center of the shop. "It's perfect," David assured her, seeing the nervous look on her face. At exactly 10 o'clock, Emma unlocked the front door. A small crowd had gathered outside: neighbors, curious townspeople, and several families with children. Mayor Phillips stood at the front, holding a large pair of ceremonial scissors for the ribbon cutting. "Welcome, everyone," Emma said, her voice shaking slightly. "Thank you for coming to the opening of the Shield and Flame." As Emma spoke about her vision for the shop, David noticed a gray-haired man standing at the back of the crowd. The man's hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and he seemed unsure whether to move closer or stay hidden. "Before we cut the ribbon," Emma continued, "I want to share the story behind this place." She touched her tattoo briefly. 15 years ago, my little brother Michael dreamed of creating superheroes. He didn't live to see that dream come true, but today we honor his memory and his creativity. Several people in the crowd nodded, remembering the Pine View fire that had shaken their community. Some of the older residents wiped away tears. "I also want to thank someone special," Emma said, turning to David. "Without Officer David Miller, I wouldn't be here today, not just because he saved my life during the fire, but because he showed me what a real hero looks like." David felt his face grow warm as people turned to look at him. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight. Mayor Phillips stepped forward with the scissors. "On behalf of Oakidge, I'm proud to welcome the Shield and Flame to our community. This shop represents the very best of our town: creativity, resilience, and hope." As Emma and the mayor cut the ribbon together, the crowd cheered. People began filing into the shop, admiring the displays and the mural. Children gravitated toward the art table, where Emma had set out paper and colored pencils for them to create their own superhero designs. David stood near the door, watching Emma as she moved through the crowd, explaining her vision to visitors. She was in her element, animated and passionate. This was her triumph, a dream realized from tragedy. The gray-haired man David had noticed earlier finally approached the shop entrance. Up close, David could see the family resemblance: the same shaped eyes as Emma, the same determined chin. "Are you her father?" David asked quietly. The man nodded, his eyes never leaving Emma. "I wasn't sure she'd want me here." "She does," David assured him. "For Michael." Emma looked up then and saw her father standing in the doorway. For a moment, she froze, 15 years of complicated emotions passing across her face. Then, slowly, she walked toward him. The shop grew quieter as people sensed the importance of the moment. "You came?" Emma said simply. Her father nodded, tears in his eyes. "It's amazing what you've done here. Michael would have loved it." Emma touched her tattoo. "Would you like to see his mural?" As Emma led her father to the back room, David felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun 15 years ago on that terrible night was closing in a way none of them could have imagined. Later, when most of the visitors had left, David found Emma sitting at the art table with a young girl who was drawing a female superhero with the shield and flame symbol. "She says she wants to be an artist when she grows up," Emma told him with a smile. David looked around the shop, at the children drawing, at Emma's father carefully examining the books on display, at the shield and flame symbol that had transformed from a child's drawing to a beacon of hope. "You've created something special here," David said. "Something that will change lives." Emma nodded, looking down at her tattoo. "A hero's job is never done," she said, echoing her brother's words. "And neither is ours." As the sun began to set on Oakidge, the shield and flame symbol glowed in the shop window, a promise kept and a new story beginning.